This video is part of the Passport JS user authentication series. If you're just now stumbling on this video, the playlist for the entire series is going to be in the description below. Today we're going to be talking about how do we take the Passport JWT strategy that we implemented in our Express application and kind of port that into a front end that will handle the JWT and attach it to each of our HTTP requests. Now, if you haven't watched the video before this, if you're just stumbling on this video, I coded and showed you exactly how to code the Passport JWT strategy in an Express app. So go ahead and check that out before watching this video. And then in this video, what we're going to do is take all the things that we built there. So basically we just built a login and register post route, and both of those routes will issue a JWT token to the user in the browser, and it is up to our front-end client or application to take that JWT, put it in local storage or even a cookie or something, and then it has to attach that JWT to every single request. So we're going to do this with Angular, and the reason being is because I, for one, know Angular better than most of the front-end frameworks, and number two, it is very compatible with JWTs. Now, if you were to, let's say, make an Express app and you used EJS as a templating language, and that's how you built your front end. Now, in that case, sure, you could, somehow implement a JWT front end, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult because the pages that we would be loading on the front end are going to be coming straight from the server, while as in an Angular application, it's an SPA or single page application, which means everything happens in the browser. So that includes the JWT stuff, and so it's just very compatible for what we're doing here. Like I said in previous videos, the goal of this one is not to teach you how to write an Angular app. So I'm assuming that you already know kind of the basics of Angular. We're not going to do anything too crazy, but I'm not going to be walking you through the structure of how Angular works and all that good stuff. The goal here is to show you exactly how we take our Express server that is issuing us JWTs and translate that into the front end. So to do that, I want to first walk you through what I've already provided you with. In the previous video, I introduced the GitHub repository. It'll also be in the description here. And when you download the repository, on the master branch, you're going to have a blank template. We implemented the first part of that template in the Express application in the last video, and then the second part of the template is what we're going to be doing in this video, and that is sitting in the Angular directory. And if we open up the main part of this application, you'll see several folders already built for you, and they're all connected up, so this app kind of runs already even though we haven't implemented the actual methods. So I'll walk you through it real quick. Let's start in app.module. Let's see what we've got here. So I've already set up the routes for us. So if we visit login, register, and protected, it's going to load the login, register, and protected components. So that's already set up for us in Angular, kind of gets that out of the way. We are declaring those components here. Let's see, here's the router module, and this is important. We have to implement the use hash option because we have our API from the Express application, and then we have the routes from the Angular application, and we don't want those to conflict. Now, down here, I kind of debated whether I was going to put this in here, but this is the setup for our HTTP interceptors, and that is something that we're going to actually implement, but I've left the structure of it intact, and it's already included in the main module, so you don't have to worry about doing that. But this right here is a very special syntax. You're probably not used to seeing it if you don't work in Angular a lot. So that's the app module, which is the base of the application. App component just has 3 links so that you can load each of the routes, and then I actually put the routes below. So we're pretty much staying on one page the whole time and just toggling between the routes by clicking these buttons up here. I can go ahead and run this just so we can see what that looks like. I don't think we should get any errors. So it loaded successfully. Let's visit in the browser. And you can see that our application is very far from beautiful. The goal here is not to style it up or anything. We just want the functionality. So as I said, if you click each of these routes, they're going to display below. So right now we're at the home route, so nothing is being displayed. But if we click login, you'll see a little ugly login form. If we click register, you'll get the register form, and then the protected route is just going to give us a message. And in this case, we don't get a message because we're not authenticated. So that's kind of the entirety of this application. Obviously, it's not something that you would show to any user, but it does give you the setup and the logic behind how you would start an application. Okay, so let's come back to the code, walk through a couple more things that we've got set up, and I'll kind of show you what we're going to be doing in this video. So the first thing we've got is the auth service. This is a service that we're going to be spending a good amount of time in. As you can see, we've got 5 different methods that we need to implement in order to kind of manage that JWT that was issued from the Express server. Next up, we have an auth interceptor, which we have to implement the intercept method for this. What this is going to do basically is take each HTTP request and it's going to attach the JWT to it. So this is kind of the magic behind the scenes. Then of course we have each of our components, so the login, protected, and register components. Let's see what I have implemented here. We basically just have the form functionality implemented, so we don't have to walk through that logic. So you see here we have a register form. Then when we submit the register form, it's going to call this method, which sits right here. And in this onRegisterSubmit, we're just going to take the username and password. We're going to make a post request to our Express application, which is on localhost 3000. And then we're going to get a response, and if it's successful, then we're going to navigate back to the login. So don't worry too much about what's going on here. This is basically just making the request to get the JWT from the Express server. And then same with the login. You're going to see something very similar. You have a form here, you have a method on submit, and that method is going to make a post request to the login route of the Express application. So go ahead, I know I didn't cover absolutely everything, so go ahead on your own time and just pause the video and take a look through this Angular app. Just get familiar enough with it, and then we will get into actually implementing the JWT strategy here. I think the first thing that we should do is implement this service called auth service. Now this is going to manage how we store and retrieve the JWT token or JWT that we have been issued from the Express server. Before we do that though, let's go and quickly review what we're getting from the Express server. So if you remember from the last video, when we register a new user, let me go ahead and register a new user real quick. We send that. Oh, and it's not going to work because the Express app is not running yet. So we need to first run the Express app. Okay, Express app is running. We can go back and actually, how do we cancel this request? Cancel. All right, so let's send it one more time. This time we should get success true, and here is our JWT. So this is how we're getting information from the Express server, and then if I wanted to log in with that same exact user, I could do that with the login route, and it's going to give me the same exact data. So this is the data that the Angular application expects, and once we get that data, we're going to basically take this token and put it into local storage. So that is what this auth service is doing. It's basically saying, okay, once we get the response, we want to set local storage, then the logout method will basically delete stuff from local storage, so on and so forth. To help us out and kind of keep things straight in our heads, I'm going to copy in this response that we get from the Express application when we register or log in a user. So I'm going to put this here and just comment it out so that we have a representation of what we are expecting to receive. And this, when we implement this first method here, the response object should be this right here. So the first thing that we need to do in the set local storage, this is going to be when we receive our JWT and we need to put it in local storage. So the first thing that we need to do is actually figure out when this JWT expires. So in the response body up here, we're going to get a value of 1 day. To make things a little bit easier and not have to deal with JavaScript dates and stuff, we're going to use a library called moment.js, which is, here's the documentation for that. And it's pretty simple, to be honest. Moment is the main function, gives you the current moment, and then you can do whatever you want with it. You can format it. Here's like the live, on the right side here is like the live updates to these pieces of code. You can also do things like add certain amount of days. So this is what we're going to be doing. We're just going to be doing moment.add and then pass in that 1D, which represents 1 day. So if we come back to the Angular application, we're going to just store, let's say, expires equals moment dot add, and then we're going to say the response object dot expires in. Alright, so we've got the response object right here and then the expires in property. So basically this right here equals 1D, and if we add that to the current moment, that's going to give us the time that this JWT expires. After we've figured out when this JWT expires, we need to set two things into local storage. To do that, we can just say local storage dot set item. And this set item method is going to take two values. So first is the name of, or first is the key, and second is the value. So we'll say token is the key, and then the value of that, if we look up in the object that we should be getting here, it's going to be dot token. So we will say response object dot token, and if you remember, that token has the bearer included, so just keep that in mind as we go forward. Local storage dot set item and expires, so that's going to be our second one, and that is going to be on the response object as well. But we actually have to do a few things to this, or excuse me, this is not on the response object, it is what we just set right here. So we need to pass in expires, and then we need to do a few things to it. So first we need to get the value of this. So this is just a JavaScript method that's going to take the primitive value of a string object, and then we will say JSON.stringify and pass in that value. So Nothing too special going on here. It's literally just to get us in the correct format. And that's pretty much it for the set local storage method. So we'll receive this object when we log in or register, and then Angular is going to take that object, pass it into set local storage. We'll see where this is actually used a little bit later, but it's going to take that response object and set these two items in local storage. Now to log out, we're just going to remove those two items. So we can say local storage.remove item, and we just pass in the name of the item that we want to remove. So once we remove these items from local storage, when Angular checks to see whether they exist, it won't find them and it will make the user log in again. So that's kind of what is going on here. The next thing that we're going to do is this get expiration method, and that is because this method is going to be required to see if a user is logged in. Now if we issue a JWT to a user, then that means that the Express application has already done all of the cryptographic logic to decide whether the user is actually valid. So if the Angular application receives this response, then we know that they are pretty much logged in. So all we have to do is check whether the JWT is expired, and if it is expired, we need to delete it from local storage. Otherwise, we can consider this user to be logged in. So to grab that expires from the local storage, we're just going to paste in a few lines here. So first we're going to get the item. It's not expires at, it should be expires as we set it up here. And then we're going to figure out so JSON parse is going to take the JSON object and make it a JavaScript object. This last return value is just going to calculate using the moment library. It's going to just calculate the point in time which this JWT actually expires. And then we'll come up in the isLoggedIn route, or not route, but function, and we're going to take this value, the expiration value, and see if the current time is before or after it. To do that, we just say return moment.isBefore. This is just a method that we have available to us, and then we're going to pass in this.getExpiration, which will return us the moment that this JWT expires. And if it returns true, then that means that the JWT is still valid and we should still be logged in. Then the last method here is just going to return the opposite of this.isLoggedIn. Pretty simple. Now that we've implemented this auth service, let's go ahead and see it in action. Before we do that, I want to remind you what is happening when we register a user using the register component. When the user presses submit on the register form, this post request is going to be sent out to our Express application, which is running over here, which will return that big object that we were talking about and looked at. And then once we receive that response object, we're going to pass it into the set local storage method, which will set our token and expires properties in local storage. Let's test this out. Go to Google Chrome. Right now, if I refresh the page, you'll see that in the application, we don't have anything in local storage for this application. Now let's go to the register route and let's put in something like JWT test and then a password of 123, and when we click register we should be redirected to the login route, and you'll see that these two, the token and the expires, has been set to the local storage. We also will console log the user object that we got back from the Express server just to see that it was successful. At this point we actually don't even need to log in necessarily because we've got these things set in the local storage, but why don't we just go and do it, JWT test 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to be redirected to the protected route. But it says you are not authorized to visit this route, no data is displayed. And the reason being is because we have not yet implemented our interceptor, which is going to take the JWT that is sitting right here in local storage and append it to every HTTP request that we make in our our Angular application. In other words, we need to find a way to, when we click visit protected route, while there is a token that is valid in local storage, to get it to actually work. Looking at the protected component, you can see that what this is doing when we click visit that route, so ng on init, so when this component is loaded, the first thing that it will do is make a GET request to this link right here, which on our Express application, as you saw in the last video, is only going to allow users to receive the correct data if they are authenticated with a JWT that the Express server deems as valid. Right here is the protected route, and if we are not authenticating correctly, if we don't have a JWT attached to this GET request, or the JWT is invalid, we should receive a 401 unauthorized error. If we are valid, then we should receive this message right here. So here's the message, you are authorized. Okay, so let's close this out, go back to the protected component, and you'll see that if we get a response, we're going to print the message attached to that response. So we should see what we were just looking at in the Express application if it was successful. But if we have an error, which is going to be a status of 401 or unauthorized, the message is going to be you are not authorized to visit this route, and we saw that earlier in the browser. So let's go solve the last piece of the puzzle. Open up the auth interceptor, which right now is empty. I'm going to paste in the implementation here, and then we're going to walk through it. So let me indent this correctly. Okay, so again, this is not an Angular tutorial. You're going to have to read up on interceptors, which you can find on their documentation. It gives you a lot of examples, but basically what this is doing is kind of intercepting every HTTP request that Angular is sending out, and it's going to attach, or it's going to run the intercept method. So what we're doing here is first we're grabbing, this should not be ID token, it should be just token. We're grabbing the token from local storage. And then if there is an ID token, so if we get a token from local storage, then so far we're good. What we're going to do is clone the request. So we're taking the current request that is going through the chain of interceptors. It's kind of like middleware in Express almost. And we're going to take that and clone it, but this time we're going to set the authorization header equal to the ID token. So that should set authorization header equal to bearer, and then a space, and then the JWT. Then we say return next.handle and pass in that cloned object. So that should basically, right here, that should successfully attach the JWT. If we don't find a token, which is very possible if the user is not logged in, then we just return next.handle the request, and there's going to be no authorization header whatsoever. We now have an auth interceptor, which should attach this JWT token to our request. Now if we go to the browser, to our application, technically if we visit this protected route right now, it should say that we are authorized, because you remember we already logged in, and you'll see that we have the token and the expires already in the browser. So as long as we attach this to our next request, it should authenticate us. So let's try that. If you remember from the last request, there was no authorization header, But now if we visit the protected route, it says you are authorized, and if we go to the network tab, this is a little bit tricky. You're probably tempted to click on localhost, but we need to click on protected, and you'll see that down in the request headers there is this authorization header which has the JWT that we had stored in local storage. So that is the basic flow, and you can use this concept to basically manage your users within an Angular application. And obviously there could be users with different types of permissions, and that would require you to come back to your interceptor and write in some custom logic to say, okay, hey, based on what role this user has, are we going to attach, the JWT or not? And also you might have routes on the Express application that may or may not require authentication. But hopefully this implementation, so the combination of this auth interceptor and the auth service, hopefully those two things, along with the previous video where we talked about how do we actually issue that JWT, have brought your understanding of user authentication to a conclusion, and hopefully this all makes sense. This is just one way that we can implement user authentication in our front end or Angular app. You're going to see a lot of different implementations across a lot of different coding languages. The most important thing is to understand how everything works. How does a JWT work, and how are we supposed to kind of pass it from the front end to the back end? Once you understand that, it should be a breeze to implement your own authentication strategy. If you found this video helpful, be sure to give it a like and subscribe. This is the end of the Passport JS user authentication series. So be sure to check out some of the other series that I have on my channel. And until next time, I'll see you later.